Hey everyone, this is Kate from Moonflower Moments. Welcome and welcome back. I thought I would do a video response to Afton with a Z and her video Trick or Treat decks as a way to kind of show you all of the spooky decks that I'm working with this season. So I feel like I was really early to the spooky season game. I started feeling that in August. I was eating, those sugar cookies you get from like the grocery store that have like the little pumpkins on them. You can get them from like Walmart or like places that are like local grocery stores, the Pillsbury ones. I was eating those and watching Practical Magic in like August. And then I kind of fell off of that spooky train. And now that it's kind of the end of October, I'm like, okay, Katie, like you have to kind of get on it. Like you need to get started. So with that being said, I've had all of my spooky season decks out. I've been kind of working with them periodically, but for this last kind of week and a half before Halloween, I'm ready to kind of give it a full-blown go. So I thought it would be fun to show you all of the decks that I have intentions of working with, set to the prompts that Afton has created. So the first one is going to be the Trick, which is a deck that always seems a little mischievous. And I had an easy answer to that one, and this is going to be the Horror Oracle. The classic Horror Oracle, to be exact. So I think this card is actually a great example of it because the keyword is dinner, but it's very clear from this that dinner might mean something a little bit different than, a nice like cozy Thanksgiving dinner or Sunday dinner. Even though I haven't seen the movies that are being portrayed in these cards, I still like how the composition of the cards kind of shows the villains in the background oftentimes and like different little scenes and kind of also the setting from the movie. But it always kind of feels like in this deck, the villains are here to kind of get you. They're here to kind of grab you. And so it really does add to that kind of mischievous air for me. I think the keywords are also really fun and kind of mischievous. So I actually have seen this one. I believe this is the Cabin in the Woods. Or no. I see the camera here. This is the Blair Witch Project, which I have still seen. And it's interesting to me because I think the woods has such a specific meaning to me. I actually, when I was living in Alabama, you could customize your license plate to have like a beautiful kind of background of the woods. And I chose a customized license plate, and mine basically said like I'd rather be in the woods. And my brother and my dad made fun of me because it made me sound like I was a hick. But like it's true, like I don't want to be in the woods hunting, but I want to be there like hiking. And so I have a very different association with the woods than what is being portrayed here. And that kind of adds that air of like mischievousness to it because it's like, oh, you think you know what this word means, but at the end of the day, that's not at all what it means in the context of this particular story. So I think that the fact that this deck portrays so many dual layers is something that makes it incredibly interesting to me. It definitely fits in with Halloween. It's kind of a little bit of like a mental little mindfuck, but like I don't mind that per se, because it's one that kind of keeps me on my toes and keeps me interested. I found that this deck reads really well paired with other decks. It's like really easy to kind of match up. Like I'll put it with like all different kinds of things that you wouldn't expect. I pair it with my Illusory Tarot, which I showed in my new deck acquisitions video, the most recent one. I also paired this deck with the Supernova Tarot, which was really fun. There's kind of a playfulness to this that like adds to that mischievous air. You wouldn't expect it to match so well with so many different decks, but this is definitely one that I feel like is versatile in both its aesthetic as well as its reading ability. Clients also really love it, especially when they're able to relate to the movie that is being depicted. It's just a fun, good overall spooky deck, and I've really enjoyed it, even though I've only had it in my collection for a short period of time. I love this. This is so cute. So this was my Trick deck, a deck that seems a little mischievous. All right, next I have a deck that is my Treat deck, a deck that I gorge on only once a year. You can tell from the back here that I love this deck. This is going to be the Sleepy Hallow Tarot. And this deck is absolutely the quintessential autumn deck. There's nothing like this deck that quite gives autumn. So it always seems to hit the spot, especially early autumn when the leaves are just starting to change. You're just starting to kind of see the scarecrow motifs and the pumpkin motifs and the witches and the black cats come up. This is definitely early autumn for me for a very specific time period. And I love that. This year I actually paired this deck, even though it's like featured more in kind of like Revolutionary War times around there, I paired it with the book Slewfoot, which is essentially about it's a revenge book about a witch that's living in New England, and she gets revenge on her brother-in-law for a lot of the shitty things that he did to her by essentially making a deal with what we know as like the modern devil, but she kind of shows him portrayed in a different light. And so it was an interesting book to read because it was featured in New England. This is kind of featured in like upstate New York, so kind of the similar geographic area, kind of similar time period. And so it was kind of fun to do a little bit of a pairing with that. I also read Hester, which is a retelling of the Scarlet Letter. And so there's like a very specific time in early autumn where I kind of want to reach for this deck, where I want to kind of reach into those books and just get like a little bit of a taste. And I only need to do it like once a year, but it's always such a treat when I do. So this was my treat deck, the deck that I only pull out about once a year. And I love this card. This is one of my favorites. All right, next I have the Bat, which is the deck that flies over your head. And for this one, I'm going to pick Mary L. And for no other reason other than the fact that I haven't given it the time yet that it deserves. So it is still currently flying over my head, but I definitely see this as a deck that is high on my list of decks to study. So I have a deep feeling that it won't always remain that way in any capacity. Oh, look how well this matches. I love it. So my brain is telling me that this is an autumn deck, even though I think some people could argue that it is definitely summer because of its intensity, because I was recently kind of sent this by someone who also has a tarot tube. And it was part of kind of a gift package, which was like so nice. She was kind of decluttering her collection. And so my brain is like, oh, I got this in autumn. It must be an autumn deck. But I think I will continually use it throughout the year, though its color tones are definitely appropriate for this time. I love the intensity of this. I love the rawness of this. I love the feralness of this, the ferocity of this. During September, I did Lionheart's challenge, which was essentially about embracing your feral nature. And I didn't have this deck at that time when I was doing the challenge, but it kind of makes me want to redo that challenge, but with this deck, because I think that this is a deck that is here to teach me, and I'm ready to kind of dive into its esoteric layers and kind of be able to reach in my back pocket and pull this deck out and know enough about the different ideas and systems that it's trying to convey that I can give really clear and coherent readings. So this is one that is currently a bat. It's flying over my head a little bit right now, like the Two of Swords. I even looked this up in the guidebook the other day and I was like, sorry y'all, I just don't get it. So I think that there are a lot of people on TarotTube that love Mary L. This deck is wildly popular for very good reasons, and my heart is very definitely open to enjoying this and experiencing this and learning from this. And so hopefully soon I'll be able to dive into it and it will no longer be a bat flying over my head anymore. So with that being said, if you know someone on TarotTube that really has done a beautiful deep dive or walkthrough of this deck, I would love to know, because I think that that's one of the ways that I'm going to kind of build my relationship with this, is kind of building a community around this deck. So this was the Mary L. Tarot. I love the way it's matching with this back cloth. So maybe it is a little bit of an autumn deck. Love that. So beautiful. Beautiful, beautiful. So that's Mary L. All right. Prompt number 4 is going to be Crystal Ball, a deck that reveals something from the mist. And for this one, I'm picking my Barbara Walker. Here we go. I almost rehomed this deck, but I instead chose to put it into purgatory. I had it in my car. I never used it, but I was like, oh, it's a tin deck. It should go and sit in my car. And I did that for like over a year. And I was just kind of sitting in my room one day earlier this year, and I thought to myself, oh my God, I need Barbara Walker. Like, I need to hear what she has to say. And it ended up being the reading that kind of transformed the second half of this year for me in a very deep and profound way. I approach Barbara Walker with a deep sense of reverence. This is not a everyday deck for me. This is a deck that kind of stays on my altar. Now that I know that that's where it belongs in my collection, I never really see it leaving. And a lot of times I don't understand what the fuck the card is trying to tell me to start out with, but then I come back to it a few weeks later, a few months later. In some cases, I have a card that's been on my altar for, I think, probably about 6 or 7 months at this point, and I'm just now starting to understand it. So even though that's like a little bit strange to put for the crystal ball, I feel like this kind of represents like the more foggy aspects of that crystal ball. You know, you're kind of sitting staring at that crystal ball, and you are kind of siphoning meaning and deciphering meaning through this experience. And that's kind of what this deck represents for me. It doesn't give me like that answer from the mist immediately, but it kind of forces me to sit in that foggy kind of space. And I really appreciate the nuance that it brings to my life from that. I was telling my friend last night that one of the reasons that I love tarot is because I feel like you are never going to be done learning it. And I think Barbara Walker is a really great companion through that, because the cards are not depicted in a standard way in many cases. So I currently have the Queen of Pentacles out on my altar for this. And in that time, I have really kind of evaluated over the course of literal months what Queen of Pentacles means to me. And so it is a deck that does reveal something from the mist, but it's a slow burn for me. And I like that. I like the point of it being the mist, and also eventually helping me see something that is in the mist, even if it's months later. I like the slow process of working with this deck. So this is my crystal ball deck, which would be Barbara Walker. All right, deck number 5 is going to be the Spider's Web, a deck that ensnares you in the tail that it spins. And that is going to be my Sublime Thresholds. This one's, I think, less spooky and more just like good autumn vibes. I intend to work with this one in a very intimate capacity in November. I think it'll be my daily draw deck then. But I absolutely love this deck. So this deck essentially features different code words or keywords to help you experience the experience of the sublime. So according to the author, the sublime is what we feel kind of when we're standing above something and we kind of see something from great heights. It is maybe perhaps something we experience when we're seeing something that is very raw and animalistic. So like two animals that are hunting each other and we're kind of captivated by it. But there is a sense of kind of awe and a sense of kind of immense emotion that you don't really know what to do with when you are engaging with the sublime. And so all of these keywords are different ways that we experience the sublime in our everyday life. So when we experience something of magnificence, something that is picturesque, when we experience passageways. And for that reason, I think that this deck is definitely one that kind of ensnares me with its tail, because it really does kind of make me sit back. It takes my breath away in so many different ways. It makes me very deeply kind of contemplate the experience of being alive. I think that is the tale that this deck is trying to convey, like the experience of being alive. And I know that all of us have probably felt that when we're kind of just sitting there and all of a sudden we realize, especially when it happens to you at a young age, it's such a clusterfuck of a feeling like, holy shit, I'm alive and I only get this one life. And you're just all of a sudden kind of chronically and painfully and excitedly aware of your existence as a human. This deck brings me back to that feeling that I had a lot when I was a kid. And so I think it perfectly ensnares me in its web. This would be my Spiderweb deck, a deck that ensnares me, the Sublime Thresholds. Here are the backs in case you want to see. I really love the backs. All right, next is going to be prompt number 6, which is the Potion. So this is a deck that is not super appetizing, but you know it works. For me, I'm actually going to pick the Insecta Obscura for this. Let me go ahead and get this one. I do believe that all of Faina Laura's decks are out of print at this point. Though I imagine if you were interested in this deck, it probably wouldn't be very difficult to find. So I love bugs personally. If you want to kind of get me started on one of my special interests, like talk to me about bugs, I'm here all fucking day for it. I love it. But the reason that I'm going to claim that this is not super appetizing for me personally is that I do find a couple of things more difficult to work with this deck. So for one, the size is kind of more difficult for me to work with personally because it's a pretty chunky deck, even though it is pretty small. And I could definitely get over that. I don't mind like breaking a deck in half to kind of shuffle it. That's not that big of a deal for me. But I think ultimately for me, I do get a lot from backgrounds of the cards. So you'll know I love pip decks. If it is like a true pip deck, I can read with it like a charm. But if it's not a true pip deck, I definitely prefer something like William Blake or illusory, something that has like a very heavy kind of busy background, because I do find myself kind of looking at all areas of the card to discern meaning. So I was watching a video yesterday by Thea, Garden Goddess Tarot, and she was happened to kind of mention that like when it's just like an image in the middle of the card, she doesn't get a lot from it. And I realized that might actually be the issue that I tend to have with this deck. That being said though, it's never one that I'm ever going to get rid of, ever, because even though I have to work with it a little hard to discern some meaning, every single time I've read with this deck, it has been uncannily accurate. And that might actually be part of my reluctance to work with it, is that I know I'm going to get my ass handed to me. It is a really accurate reader for whatever reason, super accurate. I also have recently found out, and this has made it a little bit more appetizing to me, that the keywords are actually quite, not the keywords, the titles of the particular bugs can act as keywords into the card. So let me just give you an example of this. So the common name for this particular bug is the horn fly, and we have the devil. Okay, the devil at the end of the day is like a fly that kind of flies over you. You know, you really can't escape it. It's kind of constantly buzzing in your ear. And then at the end of the day, it is pinching you and prodding you with that horn in the direction that it wants you to go. So once I realized that these little common names could act as like titles or keywords, that's when this deck kind of opened up like a portal to me. So High Priestess is really cool. Morning Cloak. Morning Cloaks are really cool because they actually hibernate. So most butterflies, moths, Lepidoptera in general, hibernate in chrysalis form over the winter, or they migrate like monarchs do. Morning Cloaks are really, really unique because they can actually survive winter as adult butterflies, and they just kind of fold up their wings and they snuggle next to trees. So I find that to be really cool, like someone kind of going its own path. But if we connect it back to the words Morning Cloak in general, you know, it's the High Priestess, and we have that concept of the cloak that is kind of cloaking over you and kind of keeping you hidden from all others. You're very in mourning, you're kind of by yourself, you're experiencing all of these things on an individual path. So once I started realizing that, I was like, damn, okay, I got it. It makes sense to me. But this is one that definitely doesn't get enough use in my collection. Like, y'all have no idea how much I love bugs. So I don't know why I don't reach for this all the time. In theory, this should be one of my absolute favorites. But I will say, even though it's not one I reach for often or very naturalistically, I do know for a damn fact, like a potion, it definitely works. So this was Insecta Obscura. Next is a fun one. This is actually the reason I decided to do the VR, was this next prompt, and it is the Cauldron, a deck that makes you feel like you're brewing up something witchy. And I have the perfect deck for that, even kind of like in the perfect little bag. This definitely feels like a little bit of a witchy bag. And that is going to be my Totem deck, my Totem Tarot. I love this deck. So this deck was created by Rachel White, who is the podcast host of The Skeptical Shaman, and I definitely recommend that you watch that podcast, you listen to that podcast, especially if you're a content creator or you are involved in the business of woo. Currently, she's kind of going through and talking to people who are content creators, and it's just really interesting to hear their experiences shared in a public forum. This deck makes me feel incredibly witchy, I think for obvious reasons. There's something very innately powerful about this deck, a deck that is so absolutely stripped black. You know, we have a black card. I have edged the sides in black. They do come in white, but I want it to be all black. Even the words themselves, so metals would be swords, and moons as cups. Here you go, you have the devil for shadow, and it's just a completely black card. I mean, this deck is great. It is one that kind of makes you, I would say, less so confront your demons and more so kind of rebel in knowledge from your demons. So let me go ahead and clarify. Because I know what my demons are, because I have a deep sense of self-awareness, I'm able to tap into this power that is me and rebel against the systems that are being handed to me. That's what this deck makes me feel like. When I want to tap into my Lilith energy, this is a deck that I think works perfectly for that. When I want to get super intuitive, I can work with this deck and the deities that are in here to slip into a different space than the mundane. But it sets off so many different kind of like blips of intuition in my mind. So for example, this is the Nine of Moons. It kind of looks like a set of kind of like blazing lights outside of like a club or outside of kind of like a movie arcade, something that's like really bright and kind of in your face, but you've had a beautiful time hanging out with your friends and now you're feeling that emotional contentment, that emotional bliss, and you're headed home for the night. That's what these cards kind of remind me of, or this card reminds me of. So this is my Cauldron deck, a deck that makes me feel like I'm kind of up to something quite witchy. All right, prompt number 8 is the Jack-o'-lantern, which is a deck that makes you want to divine by candlelight. It was an easy answer for me, and this is the Klimt Tarot. So because this is foiled, it catches the light absolutely so beautifully when you're reading at night. So this is one that I oftentimes, my husband goes to bed really, really early, and sometimes I will just kind of stay in my tarot room and light all of the different candles and really kind of get into that good ritual headspace. And I love to reach for Klimt those nights because there's something so achingly beautiful about this artwork and the way that the light catches the foiling that is on here. This is an incredibly treasured deck in my collection. It represents anguish, it represents love, kind of a softness, the way that this woman is kind of like holding herself. Even though this is the Nine of Wands, I think this deck can really kind of show like the soft underbelly of things in a way that is just so stunningly beautiful. Here's the Judgment card. That one's really full of that kind of anguish that I was talking about. Then if you look at this woman who's featured here, like even though this is kind of the Three of Wands, she has a bit of a softer face. So that's kind of what I mean by like it reveals the soft underbelly. And I always think it's great to do those kind of readings by candlelight and create this kind of like space for yourself in which you're illuminating those shadows of the darkness. So Klimt is my Jack-o'-lantern deck, a deck that makes me want to divine by the moonlight. What a sweet Ace of Cups. I always think it's Two of Cups, but sweet, sweet, sweet. Alrighty guys, so prompt number 9 is the Black Cat, which would be the deck that lurks around the edges of your collection. And for this one, I chose the NOLA Tarot Cats. And I took the prompt in actually a really kind of affirmative way and not a I'm close to decluttering this deck kind of way. I kind of took it as like it lurks around the edge of your collection because it's always kind of like in your peripheral. And I think that that's the accurate description of NOLA Tarot Cats because it does feature New Orleans. And I grew up kind of on the edge of between like Baton Rouge and New Orleans. A lot of the imagery that is in this deck kind of like sits in the back of my psyche. Like a black cat kind of does kind of lurking around a graveyard or in a room. Like the imagery in this deck, especially when it features some things that are specific to the city. So like these Louisiana blue irises that are back here, this live oak tree that's in the background here, even these cherry blossoms that are oftentimes found like throughout the city of New Orleans. Like this imagery kind of resides in me, just like a black cat kind of lurking around a graveyard. You know, it's kind of always there, even if you're not always cognizant of it. So this was NOLA Tarot Cats, which would be my Black Cat, the deck that always lurks around my peripheral. Prompt number 10 is the Moon, which is a deck that casts shadows in its wake. And of course, I'm going to pick Somnia for this one. I think it goes without saying that Somnia is definitely something that casts light on a lot of the shadows that are within us. I deeply treasured this deck. It was one of the very first indie decks that I ever purchased. And so this deck has been along for the ride. I think it was like deck number like 12. So it's been in my collection for ages. And when I first got it, I kind of denoted it as my shadow work deck. And I said that that is what this is. And continually, this deck has remained in that capacity. I will do shadow work with other decks, but this is kind of the main one that I go to when I need to examine the soft underbelly of who I am. So in a way, it's the Moon because it illuminates my shadows, but in the way, it's the Moon because it also casts shadows for me to examine. So for example, this Five of Swords, I think it's a really unique depiction. It always kind of brings up the underlying motivation of why someone is acting in that Five of Swords way. So I like this deck for getting me to question my own motivations. You know, why is this guy trying to balance two coins on this like clusterfuck of chairs? Why is he doing that? And I think when we balance our motivations and our intentions, we are able to, when we question our motivations and intentions, we're able to get that deep sense of shadow work done. So this was my Moon deck, a deck that casts shadows in its wake. Next is going to be the Broomstick deck, which is a deck that whisks me away to another place. And I have a perfect deck for this one. This is one of the newest decks in my collection. And this is going to be Sweet Twilight. Tarot of Sweet Twilight. I think I got the name right. Let me look. Yep, it's a Lo Scarabeo deck, so it is Tarot of the Sweet Twilight. So I found out recently that my favorite metaphysical shop was closing, and they had all of their decks for 30-40% off. And I remembered that they had this the last time I went. So I made a special trip to purchase from them one last time as kind of a goodbye. And I just knew in my heart of hearts that when I was getting there that this deck would be the one that was coming home with me. I didn't even look at anything else. Like, I specifically went to the store for this deck. So this is one that whisked me away to another place. I find that the way that the artist was able to capture emotion in these individuals' faces is just absolutely incredible. So I'm going to hold that up a little bit. So especially in the eyes, these people are so absolutely alive. Look at that one. It's a very good example of it here. I actually kind of recently talked about how the Strength card kind of feels like our process of masking who we really are and unmasking as well. And so it's so incredible that I kind of came to that conclusion with Imogen from Sapling Tarot when we did our collaboration video together. I'll leave a link in the description box below to that. And we both kind of came to the concept that Strength is kind of like masking. And then the next deck I buy actually has that featured very clearly. But it takes me to a completely another place. This is kind of a strange, weird, kind of eerie world. But the quote on the side of the box says something along the lines of like, growing is melancholy or like growing is grief. And I think that that has been my experience while working with this one wholeheartedly. So it has been my Scorpio deck. I know we're not in Scorpio season yet, but to me, this just feels like the ultimate Scorpio deck. You know, we're kind of going into the depths. We're experiencing that kind of intensity of that water. But there's also a sense of kind of rebirth here as well. So I think it's beautiful. It's my deck that is my Broomstick. It totally whisks me off to another place. Next is going to be deck number 12, which is the deck that has the most enchanting guidebook. This is another one that is more so fall than spooky, but it is my Enchanted Forhaxa. I did the Lionhearts challenge in September with this deck. This deck kicked my ass in all of the good ways. I absolutely fucking love this deck. So I think that its guidebook has a way of saying what needs to be said in a way that really works for my mind. So the creator, MJ Cullinane, actually created little stories in each of these cards. And I feel like she kind of thought of the story first before she kind of drew the card, because once you read the story, you can see that the card is just perfectly aligned to it. It's almost as if that story was kind of the seed of inspiration for her. So I'm going to get to a good example of this, like the tower. Love it. This tower was on my altar for quite some time last month. So here is the entry for the tower. If you would like to pause it and read it. So essentially the creatures were kind of squabbling over petty things like resources. A bunch of wars broke out, and essentially the spirits of the earth grew increasingly unhappy. So they decided to kind of set the world on fire. And so they burned down what they had created. And so the basic premise in this guidebook is that the tower can occur when, like the spirits of the earth, we need to let off some steam. The tower appears when we've gone too long sitting in frustration and are at risk of destroying everything we have worked to create. So it brings you a warning that change is coming, and it will be swift. It will be a humbling experience for you if it takes you off guard. But, you know, if it appears ahead of time, it is a warning. And I think that that's really interesting because it kind of gives you a different perspective of that tower card, of not something that happens to you on like a cosmic kind of karmic level, which is what I typically think of the tower. But honest to God, almost something that has kind of occurred because of a real human emotion, which is anger. There also kind of feels like there's betrayal there too, with kind of like the land spirits kind of feeling like the individuals have taken advantage of their creation. So there's like a level of like emotional intensity to this guidebook for all of the cards that I think is really, really interesting. And as you can tell, it's a very kind of story-driven element. So in this card, this woman is kind of like lost in examining the water, and someone is desperately trying to kind of get her attention. And I think that this is kind of a more like guttural feeling, a very practical feeling of the Four of Cups, because most of the time we just see the hand that's isolated trying to give us something, and we're kind of like, no, I don't want it. But here there's kind of like a whole story as to why she is rejecting her friend's company. And so I find the stories to be very compelling, and for that reason, this is my Spellbook deck, a deck that is the most enchanting guidebook. This is one of the decks that healed me last month, I will say that. So it has definitely been a key component in my healing. All right, next will be number 13, which is the Vampire, a deck that has transformed your entire being. And I've edged mine in orange. This is the Raven's Prophecy. I recently looked on Llewellyn's out of print decks list, and I do think this one recently went out of print according to that list, but it seems like it's still available for purchase. So if you're interested in this one, I wouldn't wait too long. Not to create a sense of FOMO, but this is one that I actually heard last year, a rumor that it was going to go out of print, and I purchased my copy. And just speaking from a personal level, I really, really have enjoyed working with it. So this deck has transformed me on such a deep level, because it is one that I've had a lot of conversations about intuition about. So I brought this deck of cards with me when I grabbed dinner with a friend a few months ago, and we really had a very interesting discussion about the particular clairs. And I realized from speaking with her that I do kind of feel a guttural sense when I'm working with this deck. So for example, if I pull the Fool, this deck really works on an intuitive level for me, because I can kind of feel a feeling in my gut of kind of like, you know what you feel like in your gut when you're jumping up and down and up and down and up and down, and like you're barely able to kind of catch your breath. That's kind of the experience that I have, is that every single card in this deck seems to be associated with a specific sensation in my body. And so once I learned that this deck was one that could help me foster and cultivate and pay attention to those experiences, this deck definitely transformed my reading style to where for me it's less so about being like in a mental space and more so being in a mental as well as physical space. As I mentioned earlier, the Queen of Pentacles has been on my altar for quite some time, and so I think it's kind of that calling to return back to listening to my body as a key indicator of a message that is coming through at all times. I've had a complicated relationship with the Queen of Pentacles, but I think that ultimately the Raven's Prophecy Tarot is one that is helping transform that relationship. and helping me see that link is a very inherent and important part of my intuition. So the Raven's Prophecy is a deck that has transformed my entire being. I recently got the Scorpio Sea by this creator as well, and I'm looking forward to working with it. I hope I have a similar experience with it as I do with that deck. All right, prompt number 14, the Haunted House. It's a deck that scares me with accuracy. This is going to be my Fallen Angels Oracle. This is a deck I do not fuck around with at any given point in time at all. This deck to me does not play. So it features fallen angels. So the subject matter itself is already pretty intense, but the guidebook on this is so stinking to the point that it is actually quite painful. So the write-ups are really, really small, but I'll go ahead and show you the example for this one. So the message for this card is aggression must sometimes be met with greater and more cunning aggression. And then it gives you a little write-up of the particular fallen angel that is depicted. But like the message is pretty intense, but then it says down here, if you cannot rise to the occasion yourself, you must seek one who can. And I don't have another deck. Like people say that Barbara Walker is a bit of a cranky old bitch, and I would agree with that in terms of the Barbara Walker Tarot. No offense, because y'all already heard me wax poetic about how I love that deck. But this deck I think is even more cutthroat. And like for whatever reason, like they have words like empathy in this deck, but I always personally get the ones that are really, really intense. And I can see like from an outsider's perspective how this could be balanced, but I don't know, man. Like this probably is another one that could have been used for the moon deck because it is one that definitely illuminates the shadows for me. But it absolutely scares me with accuracy because of the way the guidebook is written. I'll show you another example. So this one is for deception. If your own conscience is clear, beware of theft. If not, beware of exposure. And I do feel like this could be really, really easily translated to a predictive style reading. Beware of theft or beware of exposure. So I do use this primarily for predictive readings when I want to kind of fuck around and find out. This is the deck that I grab. But it is my haunted house because it scares me with its accuracy. All right, and then the last one was the easiest pick of all, and that is the Tombstone, a deck that you would take with you to your grave. So of course I picked Terra. Of course. So I don't know if I would classify this as particularly a spooky deck, but since it is a black and white deck, I think it still fits this overall time of year very well. There's nothing that I love more in my collection than Terra. Absolutely not. This was the first deck that I ever got. I actually am showing you kind of my reading copy because my personal copy I keep very near and dear and sacred to me, and I like never show on camera, nor do I read with other people with it. So this is one of only 2 decks that I have a backup copy of, and I think that it is definitely the one that I'd want to take with me to the grave. This makes my #1 on every single deck list that I have because I really love, first off, how witchy it makes me feel. Like, look at these backs. This is a very witchy deck. How tapped in it is to plant energy, which is what I primarily work with in my spirituality. But essentially how everything is stripped back because the imagery is pip style, because it is stripped back and makes you kind of sit with yourself and really kind of have to be in a space to receive a very direct hit of a message. And so for that reason and so many others, this is a deck that I love more than anything. It feels like a grandmother who is steady with me, handing me wisdom, making me a cup of tea, walking this life with me. And this definitely is wholeheartedly my soul deck, and so therefore would have to be the deck that I take with me to my grave. So this was Terra Botanical. Alrighty guys, so those were my 15 decks that I chose for Trick or Treat decks by Afton with a Z, and I want to go ahead and give her a thank you for creating this video. So I hope that all of you have a wonderful day, and I will see y'all again next time.